Hi, friends. If you are on the journey of trying to recover from chronic pain or chronic symptoms, and you've heard the saying, listening to your body or listening to your pain or the sensations in your body, this is the episode for you. I am Jen Johnson. This is Thought by Thought Healing. And on this channel, I love to talk about chronic pain and how to work with our nervous systems to recover. I come at it from a Christian perspective, but I also interview experts in the field to get their take on tools that they use with their clients, and in this case, a school that helps people to recover from these symptoms. So we're going to talk about things like listening to your body, but we're also going to talk about different diagnoses that can be part of a dysregulated nervous system. We're also going to talk about different coping mechanisms that we may be using in life that are actually causing more stress in our bodies and how to redirect those things. So, without further ado, I want to talk a little bit about who they are. We have Jennifer Mann and Karden Rabin, and the two of them work together for a school that they co-founded that is now called SOMIA International. It used to be called CFS, Chronic Fatigue School. And so here's a little bit about them. Jennifer Mann is a mind-body practitioner, yoga instructor, and functional movement therapist, and has battled severe chronic fatigue. She began researching alternative approaches to healing chronic fatigue and was able to completely recover using trauma-informed mind-body healing, which is what I talk about on my show. She now leads a community of over 100,000 followers on Instagram and is the co-founder of Chronic Fatigue School. I would follow her. She puts a lot of wonderful content out on Instagram, by the way, as a side note. Karden Rabin is a nervous system medicine practitioner and an expert in the field of trauma and psychophysiologic disorders, which I call mind-body syndrome. Over the last 15 years, he has combined principles of bodywork, brain retraining, and somatic trauma therapies and helped thousands of clients across the globe heal from chronic pain and illness. So without further ado, I give you Jen and Karden, and I hope that you all enjoy this episode. We do have a actual practice that he guides us through, maybe halfway through the episode, called BASE, that will help you actually learn how to listen to your body and what's happening in there. All right, enjoy, guys. Bye. All right, good morning, everybody. I have Jen Mann and Karden Rabin with me. Thanks so much for being here, you guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
Excited to talk today.
Yeah, me too. Let's start by just jumping right in, and let's hear a little bit about your stories, where you come from, the symptoms you had, and yeah, just a little bit from both of you. Jen, can we start with you?
Yes. Okay. So I was a professional ballet dancer. I was born in Africa, grew up in many different parts of the world. And I think I start with the ballet piece of my story because it has so many layers that are very important to what led to my chronic illness diagnosis and crash. And a lot of that is the psychological, the emotional stress that I was under every single day. Nonetheless, yeah, I loved being a professional ballet dancer, and it was all I knew, actually. But the emotional stress and abuse that I received from my ballet masters, as you call ballet teachers, yeah, it was a lot, and I was always injured. So already at the time, I was already thinking, why are people around me not as injured? And so already my brain was connecting with, I already had anxiety. So going back to being born in Africa, my dad left when I was young. And so I had all of these different environments, cultures, situations to navigate in a very sort of emotionally unstable home. So that can be hard for a growing child, a developing brain and body. Yeah. So after ballet, I had this big injury which interrupted my path. And I became a Pilates instructor, yoga teacher, massage therapist, all the things to help you move better and feel better. Feldenkrais, which is about the nervous system moving your body and helping your brain kind of communicate through movement. But it wasn't enough for me because I was attracted to those clients that were quote unquote difficult. And I remember everyone would say, Jen, this one person, they come in and it's that the pain is relentless. They've had it for 5 years or 10 years. Can you help? And so I found that what I was doing would help for some time, but it wasn't the full puzzle piece. I wanted to learn more. So I went back to school and I studied biomedical sciences and ended up in physiotherapy, which I loved, but the environment of university switched on those coping mechanisms of perfectionism, people pleasing, high achieving, and stress. So when I was in my second year of physio school, at the time, I thought it was overnight, but in hindsight, it's due to all of these building blocks that I'm sharing. I went from one day having aches and pains, but I could still push through and still wake up and do my job and work really hard, seeing clients, studying, to it all started with a back spasm that set me back in bed for a couple of days. And then on the third day, I developed a flu, and that would be the beginning of my chronic fatigue syndrome journey. I was also diagnosed with so many other things, including POTS, long COVID, EDS, hypermobile EDS, and fibromyalgia patterns. And so it was a journey of self-discovery because all of the conventional paths were not really working. And it didn't take too long for me to recognize that my patterns that were driving the anxiety in my body and in my mind and my brain had a big part in the stress that was building over the years in my body, that cumulative stress. So then I found the work of brain retraining, of the nervous system, somatic experiencing therapy, which I'm sure we'll talk about at length on this episode. And within a relatively short amount of time, for what I thought was possible because of the years of like aches and pains, but still pushing through, and then all of a sudden being completely bedbound for over a year and a half, I couldn't believe that within a few weeks I was walking and feeling better. And within a few months, I was fully recovered. So it became my mission and passion. To let people know that healing is possible, even when doctors tell you it's not, because that's what I was told. And I'm very passionate about all this work. So I just can't wait to get into some of the nitty-gritty of the body, the heart, the brain, the human, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that. It's nice to hear a story on the episode that includes those diagnoses. I know that it's not helpful to find somebody with your exact diagnosis for inspiration to heal, but those are really common ones that people get kind of stuck on. So, yeah. Okay, that was short and sweet. Karden, let's go to you. What's your short and sweet version of your healing story?
Short and sweet. Okay, I'm gonna do like this leapfrogging Cliff Notes version, and I'll see how that goes. It starts with a mother who had crippling low back pain, was addicted to opioids her whole life until she died. And so we'll just say like that was the nature of my childhood, both in terms of having that modeled to me, because a big part of our pain patterns are modeled to us, by the way, folks. But also you can imagine sort of maybe some of the more the emotional injuries that come from having a parent that's struggling like that, both in terms of pain and addiction and function. So that's the prequel that we're not going to get more into because we don't have a 10-hour podcast. And that prequel leads to after college, I decided to go to massage therapy school because I'd always been interested in the body, in touch, in the way that could always make me feel better, make others feel better. And that was the direction that I wanted to go in. And I became I fell in love with body work and functional movement, similar to like that period in Jen's life. And I say that I worshipped at the throne of if I could get everything to be aligned right, if I could get everything to be moving right, if I could get everything to be mobily correct, and if I could get everything that was weak to strong, someone should be out of pain, right? Because that's what we were taught. Jen, isn't that what we were taught? Just get it
Oh yeah.
all, shove it where it's supposed to be, and we're good.
Low
Shove
back
And
it where
pain.
it's supposed to be. That's so good.
Low back pain is caused by bad posture, right?
Yeah.
hilariously wrong, absolutely wrong, right? So, but here I am making a living out of this, helping some people, always sounding really smart, by the way. I was good at that. I could be really smart about why we needed to shove things where they needed to be and shove other things where they didn't need to be, and how you needed to keep your core on at all times, like you were trying to hold in your organs or you're going to have back pain and die, right? Like I was good at all of that awful nonsense. But during that period of time, really beginning at 25, I had a bad, well, no, not a bad. I had a low back injury at CrossFit induced by a stupid amount of deadlifts.
Yeah.
And that is how these pain patterns start, folks, is that if we have certain things modeled to us in the past, and then under a lot of stress and similar emotions, we have an injury, right? Which is what happened to my low back. Even after that injury, let's say that low back strain, whatever happened to my muscles, a little tendonitis, you name it, healed, my brain had associated that moment with a pain pattern. And then the brain starts to repeat that pain pattern in a variety of situations during similar movements that aren't actually detrimental, but it says, oh, that kind of movement hurt me in the past. I'm going to create pain when he's doing that, right? Or he's feeling a lot of stress and pressure and shame, which, by the way, is what I felt at CrossFit for a lot of reasons having to do with a really deep down belief that I was weak, that I was a failure, that I could never be fit, that I was less of a man because of my weakness, right? And so I had to use like discipline and self-shaming techniques to push myself through. And so in other situations where I might have been using similar emotional or mental tactics, I would have back pain. But I didn't know any of this. This was only getting worse year after year after year for 10 years, which was both humbling and humiliating as someone who is making a livelihood off of this. And basically, when I was on the brink of evaluating surgeons for this terrible maelstrom of low back pain, which, by the way, also created pain in my groin and my abdomen. It fired pain down my low legs. It was awful. And I was at the point where I couldn't stand or sit, really be in any shape for more than 15 minutes before there was so much pain that I just had to change. And usual story, nothing else worked, right? And I was down on Long Island teaching an anatomy and physiology component of a yoga teacher training. Again, sort of hypocritical, right? I'm teaching people how to use their bodies and I'm in a huge amount of pain. And on my friend's bookshelf was John Sarno's Healing Back Pain. Yes, yes. For those that are not listening or not watching, Jen just did like a fist bump. She's like, yes. And so I gave that book when I saw it on the shelf the biggest eye roll in history. Like imagine like a straight up Looney Tunes eye roll. Like, yeah, right. Plus, do you know who I am? I'm wicked smart about this stuff. I've been doing this for years. What could this silly little book possibly ever teach this arrogant jerk? And I picked it up anyway, and it changed my entire life.
Why do you think you picked it up anyway?
Because my soul has more wisdom than my head. And I always feel that I've had a certain level of protection and guidance. And that protection and guidance always wins through in the most important moments, even when my head is being a total moron or jerk or putting up protective mechanisms. Or at least I think that's what happened. And I have lots of cases in that. You know, I call them diamonds. They're those moments where something should have never happened, Jen, right? Like I should have never stumbled into that book in a million years, much less picked it up, but it did, right? So there's a certain amount of fate at play, guidance at play, support at play. And that, but by the way, is a big also part of my healing journey, is seeing those diamonds in my life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you accept it right up front? So you read Sarno's book, were you like, yes, this is me? Or you thought, oh, that's other people, but not myself?
Jen, I could not have paid you to set me up better. So because it's actually that I'm one who blessedly received the book cure within the first few days. I was like, it was astonishingly successful. I had a 80 to 90% improvement in agonizing pain within 72 hours.
No way.
It's also because although my brain is quite a jerk, when it reads something that sticks, right? Like,
Yeah.
remember, I told, even as a body worker, I was recognizing the inconsistencies in the solutions to the pain. I
Mhm.
was recognizing for myself that I would sometimes have pain. I'd have pain, like, let's just say, I'd have pain getting out of the car or standing at the bar, but I wouldn't have pain lifting up something heavier in a squat, right? I'd do the squat and lift it up. And let's say I was at a pain level of 7, it didn't go to a 10. I'm like, this makes no sense. If I really have bilateral lumbar herniations, it should not hurt here, but not hurt there. You know, like that. So my brain already knew something's up. And so then when Sarno introduced this one describing me to a T, personality wise,
Yeah.
demonstrating his observation of the inconsistency, my professional mind was ready. It was like, heck yes, this makes sense. And so my brain bought in, my nervous system responded really quickly. And so I was,
Hmm.
from the moment I read that book and within 72 hours of being better, that was now, it was either, I think it was 7 years ago, I could never go back to the way I used to practice. And that's what set me on this journey. And the last thing that I will say is that, but the book cure didn't last.
Okay.
And that's why I'm the practitioner I am today. That's why I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner. That's why Jen and I have expanded this work to have very deep components of embodiment, of listening, of working through childhood trauma and other aspects, because even when the mind believes and knows and creates a shift, those old, deeper autonomic patterns of coping and survival that have been with us since really we were very, very young, under stress or challenge, they will creep back in. They will dislodge the progress that your mind made, let's say with the book cure, the top-down techniques, and you need another way. And that's sort of uh, that's the epilogue of the story. That's book 3, which maybe we'll talk about now. But that's how I got into this.
Yeah. I love it. And also hate it. Um, so you two work together now, right?
Yes.
What does that look like for you guys? What are you doing together and separately in this work?
So we, first of all, we live on opposite sides of the world. So we make this work. We have a 12-hour time difference. Um, I live in Bali and Karden is in the Berkshires, and we have meetings morning and night. But we have systems and we have a team and it works. But basically, to answer your question, a few months after I had recovered, and Karden and I had met on Clubhouse, there was this neuroscience room, Ask the Pain guys, I think, and Karden was one of the guys. And I shared my story and I talked about neurolinguistic programming and brain retraining and how I went from being bedbound to walking in 3 days. And Karden sent me a message, I think on Instagram. I can't even remember if you could message people on Clubhouse. Nonetheless, we connected, and Karden was like, "Oh, do you want to tell me a little bit more about that?" And then I shared that I'd done, exquisite progress, and that my symptoms, I was able to switch off a fever, swollen pain in my glands in like under 5 minutes, and it was extraordinary. And I'd practiced so much at this point. It had been already a couple of months. But I would have an emotional experience where, let's say, unannounced, I would get a family member's phone call. I remember one time I walked out of my house, Karden, you'll remember this. I ran into a colleague, and she just switched on all of my patterns of not being good enough, unworthy, undeserving, feeling really negative. And all of a sudden that evening, I had a big crash after a couple of months of what I thought I was fully recovered. And when that happened, I was like, it's like my body hasn't received the message yet. My mind and my brain has reorganized itself. I don't wake up with chronic fatigue anymore, but I can so easily get back there when I'm triggered, when my body remembers what it's like to feel undeserving and unworthy and like I'm not good enough. So through that work, I did somatic experiencing with Karden, and I was already doing a lot of polyvagal work. I'd done a couple of courses, all the Porges, the polyvagal therapies, and Stanley Rosenberg's work, Dr. Perry Nicholson's work, and really getting into the physiology of the vagus nerve, of the nervous system. So I was very passionate about that, because just slapping my arms and my chest and inhaling deeply and exhaling in a V, my heart rate would lower and my stress, the experience of stress in my body would go down. And I thought that was very fascinating. But again, top down, physiological, but what was the origin of all of this? What was, yes, cumulative stress from abandonment wound, my dad and my mom's emotions, and moving so much as a child, and then ballet, perfectionism, people. But why was I dealing with stress in the way that it was? And how could I get to some of the origin of those patterns to teach my brain and my nervous system that then is not now, and that I can make a different choice for my body and my brain in the now. So basically, the way that Karden and I started working together is I felt fantastic. I'd say I felt maybe like 85% recovered. I was still a little bit worried about like if we had to go on a trip or if I had to go on a long walk, I would still do some practices to ensure that I wouldn't that my nervous system wouldn't tell my brain, this is a threat, this is unsafe, you're going to crash, you're going to be in bed again. So there's still a little bit of that, but I wouldn't wake up with the symptoms. So Karden said, how do you feel about helping 10 people recover from chronic fatigue syndrome? And I'd already done a bunch of courses. Karden was a somatic experiencing practitioner. We both had 10 plus years of helping clients and patients in clinical practice feel better, move better. So we felt like we had enough information through our studies as well to help people. And I think the first cohort, Karden, we filled 20 instead of 10. And we created in literally a few weeks what we thought was a really great order of approach of how to approach this work if you've been severely bedbound, if you've no energy. So that's how Karden and I started this work together. And then our course took off really quickly, and we essentially within a few months we found ourselves having this sort of company with a program in it. And now we've had more than 2,000 people take our course. We've had hundreds, I say that with goosebumps on my skin, fully recover from rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, chronic severe lupus, Lyme, chronic pain, fibromyalgia, long COVID, CPTSD, like from body stuff to brain stuff to mind and body stuff. So I think that what we created together is really cool because it works. And it's just like so amazing that we can offer that to the world. So that's what we do together. And it's called the HEAL program. And those are the people who come through and find us and take our program.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just for people listening, that used to be
Yes.
called the CFS school, right?
Yes, we started with the intention. I remember Karden had a course called Stress School, and he said, well, let's just do something for people with chronic fatigue syndrome. And then by the second cohort, we were getting people with fibromyalgia, pain, like, can I try this? And we were like, yeah, it's gonna help. And then literally we realized that the approach that we had held so much of someone's experience from beginning to end that we realized this is not just chronic fatigue syndrome, because a lot of the origin and the cumulative stress and the experience of each of us means that we're going to end up with a different symptom. But if you had had my experience, maybe Karden would also have chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia rather than low back pain. So it was very fascinating how that happened. So yeah, it was chronic fatigue school, CFS school. Now it's HEAL. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Karden, anything you want to add to that?
I was simply going to add that, a lot of people will sometimes really be taken aback by how can one collection of approach address that laundry list. And I think of two things. One, I know that you've interviewed Howard before, Howard Schibner, and Unlearn Your Pain. And if you look in his book and you're looking at what he would classically call, mind-body syndromes, he's got a list of almost 36 items in there, not just pain, right? We have there's IBS, there's fibromyalgia, there's chronic fatigue syndrome. He includes depression and anxiety as part of these mind-body syndromes. There's tinnitus. There's my favorite, which is spasmodic dysphonia, which my wife had, by the way, and can I tell that story real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to tell that story and then finish my loop. So leading up to our wedding, which if you know anything about weddings, is always the least stressful time of your entire life, and you have no emotions about it whatsoever. And there's no relational conflict at all between you and your spouse or your family. It's all just sherbets and rainbows and unicorns.
Yes.
Yes, that's exactly what marriage was. Now, it was the most stressful time, right, ever. We also overwhelmingly decided to do too much, DIY stuff and totally unsupported.
Mm.
Also, I joke always that my wife turns into a pumpkin after 7 p.m. She's really functional from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and then she just breaks, and she had to pull a week of almost all-nighters. It was, and I'll just leave it at that. It was a really rough week going into it. And at the wedding, when we were finally in fun zone and out of, horrible stress zone, that's another thing that often happens at your wedding is that you talk endlessly and yell and scream and do joyous things, and you can lose your voice. So my wife lost her voice the night of our wedding, which again, like a little bit of laryngitis, losing your voice from talking too much. That moment, like my low back pain, like the deadlifts, that was the injury. But the injury got duct taped to that massive, unresolved amount of stress. And also, let's just say my wife was, speaking of shame again, she was ashamed at some of the behavior she exhibited in that week leading up to the wedding because of the amount of stress she was under. And then for a full 16 months, this was also before I knew about Sarno, by the way, my wife's voice, she had spasmodic dysphonia, and she was a yoga teacher. It was really bad not being able to speak unpredictably or for long periods of time. It started to depress her. It started to make her really moody and irritable. She began to not talk, right? In the same way that someone with low back pain might not go out and socialize because they're worried about their pain. Someone who can't talk doesn't want to talk because they need to save their voice for stuff. She tried voice lessons. She tried every gargle under the sun. She did Chinese medicine. She did herbal teas. Honey was her BFF. Nothing worked. And it was about a year and a half later, and as I was pretty now steeped in the TMS approach, plus the somatic stuff that I was getting into, I asked her if it was okay for us to listen to her throat and discover what was going on there. So I remember she was laying on this love seat that we had. I was on the floor. She was on the love seat. So I was sitting next to her. And I gently coached her into placing her attention on the area of her throat. And in the HEAL program, we don't somatically track, we listen. And we listen because if I were to say to either of you, I'm with double gens right now, I'm looking at two lovely human beings, I would like to just stare at you and track you. How does that make you feel?
Creeped out.
Totally and appropriately. But if I were to just say like, hi, what's going on? I'm here to listen.
Yeah.
That feels a lot better. So same with our body. When we are tuning into our body with an intention of listening, compassion, and presence versus I need to look at my body to see what's wrong and evaluate. Blah, 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 blah. Very different neurological response. And so as Jillian began to tune into her throat, I also skipped a step or two because I had a hunch. I'm like, tune into there. What do you notice? And she brought up, well, it feels like there's heat in there. It feels really tight. It feels like it's blocking something. I'm like, wow. And I'm like, and I said, sweetie, can you go back to the time of our wedding and remember some of the harder parts? And literally, as if the throat itself had been blocked, like tears just start streaming down Jillian's face. And this expression of the shame she had felt, the embarrassment she'd felt, the resentment she'd felt, all of the emotions that had been really constant, and just they came out. And I invited her to then have some compassion for that past self and what it was under and what it was feeling and how that was such an impossible situation to be in. And you could see her face and you could just see her entire body softened and the throat released. And in the past, now we've been married for, let me get this right, 9 years in just a couple days. So it's been 7.5 years since this intervention. Only twice under extreme stress has she had any symptom of spasmodic dysphonia again. And we've known exactly what it is. And we've been able to go right back into that cluster of emotions that tend to get repressed, move them or listen to them, give them love, move them, and then the symptom goes away.
Yeah.
So full circle to how can this cause so many different kinds of symptoms? When we get an infection like an influenza, like flu, you name it, you never question that one virus can give you a fever, give you achy joints, make you have a bunch of mucus, have your belly hurt, make you vomit. You never go, oh, it's so weird that one virus can give me these 8 symptoms. It's no different. When you have nervous system dysregulation, mind-body disorder, okay, one cause similar to the virus, it can then, and it's actually even easier for the nervous system to create a more wide variety of conditions. It can produce a whole array of symptoms, just in the same way a single virus can. So I know so many people listen to this work and they're like, no, I'm different. I don't fit into that. Da, 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 da. And I'm like, no, you do. If the background is there, if this background of what we've talking about resonates with you, and just because your symptom is a little left of center or right of center or seems like a combination, I promise you, your nervous system is involved.
When you say this background that we're talking about, just for clarity's sake, what do we mean by that?
Yeah. Jen alluded to it in the beginning when she shared her story, and Jen, our host, I'm sure that you have a similar background, but I like to really, if we grew up, it really has a lot to do with child in an environment where sometimes people are very hesitant to use the word trauma.
Yep.
We're trying to demystify trauma, right, guys? Like trauma is anything that happened to you or didn't happen to you that encouraged your brain, nervous system, and body to have to protect itself more, fend for itself more, lean towards the side of hypervigilance and feeling less safe, okay?
Yep.
And getting stuck in that cycle. How about I give you that definition of trauma? It's anything that did or didn't happen to your nervous system. Did happen would be like abuse, a car accident, growing up around violence, right? Didn't happen would be emotional neglect, poverty, baseline levels of security. So trauma is both what happened and what didn't happen, right? Also, for everyone who's listening, your brain and nervous system don't care about comparison or relativity, meaning that just because someone next door grew up in a much more, let's say, abusive environment than you did, your sweet little child body and nervous system didn't know that and it didn't care. It was not comparing its experience to anyone else. So it does nothing for your safety, right? If my daughter has a scrape on her knee and she's really upset and hurt in that moment, right? And I go, well, at least you didn't get your leg cut off. Do you think that provides her with any sense of safety? Do you think being like, well, other kids have has scraped it all the way down to the bone? Do you think that makes her feel any better in that moment? No, that's bonkers.
Nope.
So
Yeah.
that's what trauma is, guys. It's what happens and what doesn't happen. Especially as children, our nervous system has no comparison and it doesn't care about comparison. It's what's happening to you. And if you have enough of these experiences, or just a few really bad ones, it tips the scale of your nervous system out of a general place of safety, feeling okay, and more towards what's going on around me? Are these people going to hurt me? My own feelings have hurt a lot. I'm going to stop feeling those feelings because it just doesn't feel good. So this background of things that happened to you that tipped you towards vigilance, anxiety, unsafety also tips you usually to not feeling your body, because who wants to feel any of those things?
Yeah.
That blend of childhood stuff, bad stuff happening to you, trauma, and the repression bit are usually the sort of fertilizer in the soil that makes us ripe for something to come. And Jen is chomping at the bit here. Go, Jen.
I wanted to say that was so beautifully illustrated. And then the reason why it sticks in our body is because we develop coping mechanisms to deal, to survive with what happened. So if we have an abandonment wound, if we have trauma that lacks repair, there's just rupture and no repair, we move through life thinking that that imprinted pattern in our brain is going to keep happening. Our brain is a pattern recognition machine. It saves energy. So it doesn't have time when you're an adult to say, oh, this friend of mine is not my mom or my dad, or this bad thing that happened to me. This is a 37-year-old friend of mine that is angry at me. Our brain instantly recognizes a pattern that is similar to what happened, and we deploy, unless otherwise rewired or retrained or healed, the same patterns that helped us survive. So our nervous system's main job is to help us survive, whether through making our heart beat, reminding us that we're hungry, or literally feeling a threat in our environment, a threat in someone's behavior, and helping us through the fight or flight response, or the freeze response, or the shutdown response to react. So why the nervous system's role is so important and vital is because it keeps us alive, it moves us through life, and its perception of life is our perception of life and our very own physiological perception of if our nervous system is in a state of fight or flight, meaning that it's in an energy conservation mode, meaning that it's constantly thinking about keeping us super safe. When we get sick, our immune system is going to get the signal from the orchestra director that is the nervous system of all the other systems in the body that you have to protect at all costs. And so the body starts, for example, over time, an autoimmune disorder. Or, for example, you get a virus and your body isn't able to get rid of the virus, and you are stuck with these symptoms that keep representing itself. I had inflammation, swollen lymph nodes, and achy lungs with no underlying root cause other than the widespread inflammation caused by stress. And so the we call it a through line, something that has an origin and presents itself in the present. The through line of all of this is how you move through the world. So whether you have a lot of stress, whether you don't have a lot of stress because of the choices you've made in life, the relationships you're in, how you deal with stress is how your body will respond. So that's why in a work environment, a very high stressful work environment, some people are okay. Some people can thrive and other people are really sick and really struggle. And it's not the amount of stress that one person has versus another. And obviously, we don't want too much stress in our lives and we want to prioritize self-care and boundaries. But two people will respond in two different ways. And stress is good, but chronic stress is not. And that is what truly leads to this presentation of, nervous system dysregulation, but also cardiovascular diseases, stroke, heart attack. What is the root cause of those? Other than, and this is this is hardcore what I learned in physio school. This is the science that the doctors know, like cardiovascular disease, aside from lifestyle factors like nutrition, is rooted in stress, chronic stress. And where chronic stress comes from, the patterns that keep repeating themselves, creating that loop of stress that's ongoing. Yeah.
So I'm hearing us talk a lot about the cognitive end of this, kind of the brain training. How do we change the way we're thinking about how we're operating within life, the coping mechanisms we're using? I assume when you say coping mechanisms, we're talking about people pleasing and perfectionism and those traits. Is that
anxiety, depression, addiction? Yeah.
Karden?
But sorry, I'll let you finish your question first.
No, the list goes on. Being controlling. Those are all of those things would be the coping mechanisms for the way we try to survive or cope with what happened to us as kids and to perform and to just, make our way through the world.
Yeah. I'm glad that you said being controlling, because I don't think we talk about that one enough in this realm.
Oh, Jen and I talk about it enough because she has a partner that's very controlling. By the way, if you ever want to have a hilarious business partnership, have one of you be a perfectionist and the other one be a control freak.
And by partner, he means Karden, not my husband.
Oh!
He means himself.
I'm actually really glad we clarified that. I was like, Karden is like throwing her husband under the bus on air. That's gutsy. Okay.
I thought you might have thought that because your face went like, ooh, this is a scoop.
No, Jan and I are very friendly.
Okay.
Great guy. Do not think of him as a control freak. No, we're talking about moi.
Okay, got it.
And I'm the perfectionist.
Yeah.
Recovering perfectionist. Yeah.
Yes. I am a recovering people pleaser. So
same.
So what I kind of want to get to is the bottom up approach, or the somatic work, or in your book, I think I got access to 1/3. So you have a book coming out. Let's just say that, right? When is it? When's it come out?
The Secret Language of the Body is coming out on July 9th here in the States, wherever books are sold. And Jen is holding up a copy. It's actually already available in the UK and most places outside of North America. Publishing world is weird. It got published at different times. But yeah, and it's a manual. It's a book driven and organized around practices that teach you how to listen to your body, your nervous system through your body, how to interrupt the patterns and coping mechanisms that are keeping you stuck, and then how to redesign them and create entirely new neurological and somatic pathways to have a body that's not dominated by stress and chronic illness anymore. So that's the book. But continue, Jen.
Okay, so I am particularly interested in talking about listening to our bodies, because I think for those of us who have healed, there's a massive amount of time that's given to kind of like changing the way you think and the way we approach stress, and catching those distorted thoughts and negative thinking, blah, 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 which is really helpful. But I want to talk about your approach to listening to our bodies and the messages it's sending us, um, and what does that mean for somebody? Let's just talk to the person that's listening that is like, what? What do you mean my pain is sending me a message or things like that? Yes, I think Karden wants to speak.
Uh, can we just do it for a second?
Yeah.
Okay, let's just try it for a second. Um, just so that listeners know, if you're driving, this might not be the best time to do it, but if you are still, I'm going to guide us through something that Jen and I call BASE, which stands for breath, action, sensation, and emotion, which is a really nice way to introduce you into what listening is actually all about. And the last thing I'll say before we do this is back to my joke earlier about body scanning versus listening to someone. Listening is an act of curiosity. It's an act of presence. It's an act of compassion. It's also an act that's not looking to fix, right? Again, if we do this relationally, right? If if
Mm.
if uh if my spouse comes to me with a problem, or any friend comes to me with a problem and they're in duress, or my children, usually the first and most skillful and loving thing I can do is just listen to them and empathize them and see them and make them feel heard. That connection helps to make them feel safe and regulate. Just that. And often, how many times have we got into into this boiling pot of water, especially us men, I'll just speak for us, when we try to fix too fast. Oh, honey, just do this. Oh, honey, just do that. Shut up. I know what to do. You think I'm an idiot? You know, just listen to me. And it's yeah, Jen.
I think was that supposed to be your wife?
I'm getting in so much trouble on
Yeah,
this podcast.
you
I'm
are.
insulting her husband. I'm making fun of my wife's voice. Jeez Louise. But I know we all know what I'm talking about. And
Yes.
so same thing here with listening. And last but not least, skillful listening actually usually guides you towards the heart of the issue or the problem or the message. And then we might be able to do something about it. So I just want to do that as a little backdrop.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I invite you to close your eyes. And as if we were sort of in the balcony of a theater, can you direct your attention, your inner gaze towards your body? We're looking down towards the stage. And the first thing I'd like you to do is notice the area around your chest and your heart and just be curious about it. Don't change anything. Does your breathing feel shallow or deep? Broad or narrow? Open or restricted? Do you feel like you're getting the air you need or not enough of it? And just tuning into that area and those qualities of your breath starts to give you some interesting information about how you might be doing. Maybe you're like, whoa, no, I feel really grounded and relaxed and I'm open and deep. Or, wow, I feel like I'm breathing into a teacup through a straw. Those are two very different nervous system states. And then we can spread our attention to action. Action is the word we use for anything your body, your whole body, is doing or isn't doing. For example, what shape is it in? Does it feel erect and open and broad and strong? Or does it feel curled and contracted and protected and rigid? Or does it feel collapsed, like it's sinking. And does it want to stay still, or does it want to get up out of its chair? Does it want to go do something? Does it want to check its email? What are all those actions, those desires? Does it want to hide? That's going on. Action gives you a great indicator of whether or not your nervous system is in maybe a collapsed state. It wants to do some flight, or it's in shutdown, or maybe it's in a real fight state and it's very anxious and it wants to just keep moving, going, going, going. Oh my God, my body is always buzzing like that. And then there's S, there's sensation. Are you drawn to anywhere in your body in particular? Is there any area of pain, tightness, heat, cold, clenching? So tuning into sensation also starts to flood you with information about what your body might be doing in certain parts. And then lastly, we'll take a visit to emotion. You can return back to the area of your breath, your heart, and your chest. And now knowing a bit more of what the qualities are there, the sensations, the actions. Is there an emotion present? Are you annoyed waiting for this segment of the podcast to be over? Are you feeling joy? Like, oh my God, this is the nicest thing I've done all day. And maybe in that tight chest, there's just a feeling of anxiety or low grade fear, like you didn't even know it was there. Now, taking one last moment, maybe placing your hand on your chest, and whatever information you got, I'd just like to acknowledge you and for you to acknowledge yourself for taking a moment to just listen with presence, curiosity, and compassion. And how does that feel? How does that make you feel? And then we can open our eyes and come back to the podcast together. And Jen, do you want to report at all a little bit on maybe what that listening experience was like? What you noticed?
Yeah. Yeah, I found more anxiety than I was expecting to find, putting a label on it, for a little bit more tightness, and um, even an emotion of needing to fix, an energy. I felt an action of wanting to kind of jump into the podcast, be there with you
Mm,
guys, and at the same time, a little bit of energy that kind of wanted to get under my desk. Kind of both, you know?
Mhm.
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And isn't that, well, first of all, I just want to really acknowledge you for labeling and articulating so well from that brief experience. But that's a lot of information, isn't it? Like, that was a lot of stuff in a very brief period of time, and stuff that, I presume that you have, we all, that you have a good self-awareness, but when we really pause to look a little deeper and use the base model, we can be surprised that, whoa, maybe 60% of me feels pretty chill, but there's a 40% of me that's actually much more anxious than I thought, clamping more than I thought. Yeah, I might not have my low back pain, but my gut pain has been on. And why? Because you maybe weren't taking the listening slowly or deep enough.
Mm.
So thank you for participating in that. And other Jen, any thoughts, feedback, directions?
No, that was wonderful. Thank you for leading us. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was great.
S-
Mhm.
So that's where we start. That's where we information gather. Also, I hope that some of your listeners just felt better at the end, because even before we move on again to fixing or doing, it can be very reassuring and regulating to just go through that process. Um, and from there, there's so many places we can go, but that's the heart of listening from the bottom up.
Yeah. So when we're listening, I was just kind of noticing, observing in that BASE information, but that information was actually packed um, with with messages. Um, I think it can be easy to think like, so now I have the message. What do I, how do I solve this thing? How do, how do I resolve the fact that part of me wants to get in the screen and be with you guys and the other part wants to hide under the desk? I'm just using that as a silly example. But for people who are listening, is the point of this just to notice, or is there action steps that we take from
Well,
information?
listening and awareness are the first step, right? If you don't do anything with it, you're connecting with yourself. Potentially, if you have anxiety, actually, you're just making yourself more anxious, because when you tune in, the anxiety gets louder, or you're even more aware of the state of your palpitations or your fever or your pain. So it's the awareness in a sense of listening, and then what you do with that information. So in our book, for example, we take you through 3 steps, which is the awareness. Listening is one part of awareness. And then we take you through interruption, and we take you through redesign. The interruption is what comes after the awareness of learning some of these messages are helpful and some are not. So in our book, we take you through different types of exercises and practices that help you switch and rewire from the bottom up. But you were talking about top down earlier and bottom up, and I like to call it the side door. There is really no distinction between top down and bottom up, because when we do a top-down exercise, we're still influencing our body. And the reason why it works is because we're getting a new message back into the brain, the mind, from the body. That's how our mind knows what I've done has worked, or there's been a shift. And the same with the bottom up. The reason why, whether we're talking about somatic experiencing or a very physical practice, like stimulating your vagus nerve by using vocalizations, by slapping, tapping your body, or shaking, or moving your hips in a certain pattern that can help release pent-up emotions and trauma. It's always about finding ways to help your brain and body communicate better. So it's really, there's one communication system, which is brain, body, body, brain. And it's about finding ways in the awareness step, in the interruption step, in the redesign step, to find a better communication that sticks, that doesn't switch on the stress, that doesn't switch on the hypervigilance or the shutdown or the anxiety or the depression or the addiction or the control and so on and so forth. But even when I say those elements, it's not a cognitive process. We're calling it a name because there's an action, but we know it's happening because we feel it in our body. There's a tightness, there's a sensation, there's a movement in our chest, in our back, in our hips that's associated to when we're people pleasing, when we're being controlling, when we're anxious. So the interruption step of the AIR approach is about, through the work, learning which of these elements are helpful and which were helpful because they helped me survive. But now I would like to change and redirect. And really, our work helps you tune into your own intuition rather than, this is not helpful. Do this for everyone because we're all the same. We all have a nervous system, but we're all different, which is why this work, it's difficult to be prescriptive, and that's not what we are, because everyone has a different experience. Karden led a beautiful practice. Some of us will have the best experience and others will be triggered. And, you know, with all of our exercises, even with a somatic practice, like tapping your arms, one person can feel soothed, another can feel activated. So it's all about awareness, right? Always, is this practice serving me? Is it helping me? So awareness, interruption, and redesign is really about changing in real time, having a different response based on the interruption you've already done. So interruption is essentially, if there's a communication in the brain and body, interruption does exactly that. It interrupts it, it helps the mind and the body get on a new train track. And through practice, hopefully that becomes your new normal. Like the reason why this work works is thanks to neuroplasticity and the very science of how we learn a skill, of how we forget a skill, of how our brain's chemistry reorganizes itself to cater for our needs. And so in the book, we talk about a term called bioplasticity as well. Yeah, and bioplasticity is fascinating because it's how, you know, for example, endometriosis can have actually a reversal in symptoms and actual effect of the tissue that has grown in other parts of your pelvic area. And the way in which these changes happen is through the nervous system, the immune system, and your muscles, and your heart rate, and your brain, all the systems in the body. There's a knock-on effect, a domino effect. So bioplasticity is why by rewiring your brain, you can heal your gut function, you can heal arrhythmias and ectopic beats and palpitations, and so on and so forth. So going back to the air approach, it's really as simple as breaking it down to what do you need to start to change, to implement the change, and for the change to work in your brain, your body, and your life. And it's awareness of the patterns that are running subconsciously, interruptions of the ones that are unhelpful, and the redesign of those that are no longer serving you, and that now you're calling in for a new response, a new way of moving through life, which is truly life-changing.
Okay, so we are running out of time, but and I feel like there's so many places we could go in closing. In that redesign process, are we talking about redesigning how the nervous system is operating, or are we talking about redesigning the coping mechanisms such as perfectionism and being controlling and people pleasing? Are we redesigning how we move through life, or are we redesigning the nervous system, the bioplasticity, or is it both?
Karden's going to answer, but I'm going to say one thing. What's the difference?
Thanks for taking the wind out of my sails, Jen, because I was just going to say, there is no difference. But I'm going to break how there is no difference, right?
Yeah.
So there's no difference. They're all part of a continuum of how your mind and body respond to the world, period, right? And remember that continuum was driven by safe, unsafe, right? What did I need to do to survive and cope?
Yeah.
So as a control freak, right? My safety is my primary method of ensuring safety is to have everything basically be well organized, for me to triple check things, for me to make sure that one of my team members got the memo more than once, that I've got like duplicates of things because I get so irritated if I don't have the thing I need. I've gotten really good at always basically, if control is a hammer, right? I use that to hammer every possible thing in my life. That works for a while until it doesn't. And moreover, I'm using that hammer all the time because when I listen with bass, I've got that maybe permanent experience of anxiety and fear in my chest that I'm not noticing. So let's say you asked, like, I'm going to use how you felt that core line of anxiety, Jen, a moment ago when you did the bass thing. First, we need to interrupt that. We could just do a vagus technique like a voo-ah, which is a humming tone that goes through your body.
Mhm.
And that alone can often be enough to just interrupt the the blank record loop of anxiety going on in your body. Often things are just in motion because they're in motion, not even because there's a present reason. So I just want to illustrate that. So when we interrupt and bring the body into a regulated and safe state with something as benign as a voo or as the slapping that Jen loves, that can be enough to make you feel good. And then if you feel good and safe, your coping mechanisms have less fuel because your coping mechanisms are energized by the unconscious lack of safety and bad things you're feeling in your body. Does that make enough sense so far? Because I got a little more to go.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, great. So we're using these interrupting techniques to just stop the momentum often of this perpetual dysregulation. Like the thing that scared us might have been days, months, or years in the past, yet we're still running.
Yeah.
Okay. We regulate ourselves enough with these interruption techniques that we know what it's like to feel to not run, and that might feel good. But Jen said we are pattern recognition and habit repetition machines. I might be regulated now, but then that email comes in my inbox and I'm like, oh crap, I have a lot to do. And instantly my coping pattern of, oh, here I'm feeling the anxiety because I'm going to get in trouble, right? And I need to start working busily to make sure that everything gets solved. This is where the redesign comes in. First, we're going to do interruption again. I'm going to interrupt my old pattern. I'm not going to go right into manically responding to the email. I might do, again, a vagus nerve technique. We have other techniques that are called space that just interrupt us. We have deeply physical techniques called switching, where we just start doing something like pressing our arms into the wall or stomping our feet. I got to stop the train from leaving the station towards the wrong destination. And then a redesign technique. These are a little bit deeper, but let me go into my body and go back in time to when I started feeling these coping patterns. And in relationship to my memory and in my body, can I start reassuring my old neurology? And sometimes we use part works or inner child work that, as Jen said, now is not then. We are not in trouble. We're not being marched to the principal office. We're not going to get spanked, right? The coping pattern is perpetually in place, not just because of triggers in the present, but because of how they were ignited in the past. And so the redesign work, and there's lots of ways to go about it, have to do with updating your neurology, updating your responses. So again, awareness is everywhere. Then we have to interrupt to make sure that the old pattern doesn't initiate. If we've done that and we've brought enough safety and containment, we'll do the redesign techniques that help teach our brain not only a new way, but help to sort of unlearn the old way. And then neuroplasticity, you got to rinse and repeat a lot because that's what the brain needs.
So you, in that portion of it, you are practicing telling your nervous system or showing your nervous system, I don't have to control all these emails in my inbox right away.
Oh, I love how you want to get right into it. Essentially, yes, like I have to work over and over and over again on supporting my body in feeling trust and safety in letting go. That's a big one, right? So another big thing is when a mistake happens, when a team member does, let's say, forget a task and causes a problem, I need to stop myself from going into full red alert and being like, see, this proves it. I need to control everything all the time or something bad happens. And I need to back off and sort of borrow a card from Jen's playbook, which is it's okay. It's okay. This doesn't mean something bad is going to happen to us. This doesn't mean that we're going to get sent to the principal's office. This doesn't mean we're going to, again, get spanked. Like that's a big thing is we call it, part of the work we teach is called pendulation, where you deliberately help your body blend and move from a state of fear and survival into a state of safety and trust, even inside a previously triggering moment. So yeah, in fact, demonstrating to your body that a mistake can happen. And believe it or not, I can teach you to feel physically okay in the midst of that mistake. Does that help
Yeah.
clarify a little more?
Yeah. Yeah, it absolutely does. I think just my own story a little bit. My biggest exile, if you're going to go parts work, is I do not want to feel shame. I will do anything to not be judged. And here I am running a podcast, which everybody judges. So a big part of my healing was the parts of me that protect me from being judged needed to know that I am safe even if I'm judged. I'm going to be okay. I can trust even when I experience the shame and judgment that comes in this world that we live in. So I think that's the redirect you're talking about is working with, oh my gosh, there's this awareness that I have to control others' perception of me so that I feel safe. And then interrupting that and teaching over time. My worst fear is safe.
Yeah, you said it really beautifully. You really beautifully. And a resource you could use is in that moment where, let's say, someone does leave an, an a mean comment on a podcast, right?
Yeah.
To help that part of you that feels shame to be like, and right next to this is a comment that said, this episode changed my life, right?
Yeah.
And working with your brain and your body to have like both and not be destroyed and actually be okay.
Yeah.
And that really reminds me of what I feel when when I feel like I'm not enough, like I've made a mistake, like someone is not necessarily judging me, but that they think that I'm bad. It's all about, at the root of that is, why am I like, it's that, the unconditional love. If we feel unconditional love within ourselves, right? Because it's all about our perception. It's if our perception of unconditional love comes from within, the people around us and the relationships that we're in can say anything to us. They might be hurtful, but it won't affect us and it won't create this crumbling that happens when we think that this experience is real, it's true. I am literally not, I'm conditionally loved. If only when I am being perfect and only when I'm not being judged, I know that I'm safe in the world and that I'm loved. And it's so powerful in the redesign process, to build that within you, to build resources inside your body through visualization, through physical, somatosensory practices, meaning those more, the exercises that switch on the parts of your brain that are like, what's that spiky sensation under my foot? Like a spiky ball that you roll underfoot, or wow, this exercise of pushing against the wall is really stimulating my muscles. When you when you give the brain a new shiny object while you're experiencing the trigger, it's so helpful because it reorganizes its priorities, and all of a sudden now it's, oh, okay, I feel spikes under my feet. And it really helps to reorient the focus of the brain from, I'm unworthy, this is so stressful, to, I can do this, I can manage this, which is why top down, bottom up, same thing, and doing both at the same time is health changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. I have kept you guys over. Any closing remarks from either one of you.
I was just going to say, I've loved where we've meandered in this conversation because I think it really shows the humanity of this work. Um, there are practices and techniques and methods and things to learn. Um, but I think anyone who's been through this work, who's healed in this work, um, it is not metaphor or hyperbole or even cliche to say like it is a journey home to self, right? It's a journey of really letting your humanness to bear first to yourself, right? And I hope that just everyone listening can hear that in today's conversation. Um, so it's not just about healing your symptoms. It's about saving yourself.
Mhm.
And it takes so much courage and brave. You are so brave to heal yourself because it's so difficult to take that responsibility on, right? No one's going to do it for you. Change happens when change happens. When you learn that your choices, your actions, your healing, what you're learning, what you're doing, what you're thinking, what you're feeling heals you. And it's so hard because as we've learned in today's conversation or revisited, at the bottom of everything is always an uncomfortable emotion, always an unresolved feeling that needs to be tended to in all these different ways.
All right. Thanks, you guys. If people
Thank you.
want to contact you or learn more about you, websites, Jen, you have a huge Instagram following. Karden,
No.
do you? I've definitely seen.
No, I'm on what is it? Snapchat. On Snapchat. I'm kidding.
No, Karden's doing amazing on his Instagram. Who knows? By the time we listen to this, one of his reels might have gone viral and he will have millions of followers.
What else? The shortest answer is that follow on Instagram is really the best place to follow us because it's where we are doing the most active sharing of techniques and ideas and our work. And so it's I am Jen Mann on Instagram. It's Karden Rabin. I know that's really original on Instagram as well. And then our organization Somia International on Instagram. Somia, like very Italian. Somia. And then our website is somiainternational.com. And both on Instagram and on the website, we have free resources. There's also, of course, our Heal course, which is the soup to nuts support for self-healing from these disorders. And then there's our book, The Secret Language of the Body.
Yeah.
Right. And I'd like to add for anyone listening to this episode, we'd love to offer you a 40% discount for our program if it resonated.
What? I didn't know that.
He's joking.
The control freak over here is like, what?
Comedy relief here.
No, but seriously, if any of this work speaks to you, yeah, we'd like to offer you that gift.
Sweet. I will put all
and in
those...
here, how do they get it? How do they get are they DMing us? What are they doing?
Perhaps we can send you a link, Jen.
I can put it all in the show notes. That's what I was going to say. Yeah, I'll put all those resources in the show notes. So, yeah.
All right.
All right, listeners. Thank you for watching. And thank you, Jen and Karden, for being here. I appreciate you both.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Let's see if I can figure out how to stop this thing.